Apologies, Mr. Chair. I do believe we are okay to continue. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the agenda approval has been moved by Councillor Doherty and seconded by Councillor Neal. So you'll see on the agenda, there's the usual items. There's one delegation, there's a briefing, and there's one item of business, and then the usual items. So is there any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, I will call the question on the agenda as printed. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Now we have the confirmation of minutes from our last meeting on February 11th. So we need a mover to seconder for those meetings, or for those minutes. Moved by Councillor Stanek, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that the minutes from February 11th be approved. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the minutes. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. Now we have disclosure of pecuniary interest. Be members of the committee. Seeing none. Delegations. So I have one, Sébastien Boucher, resident, will be present to speak to the committee regarding active transportation on Montreal Street with respect to pedestrian pathways and crosswalks. So, Mr. Boucher, I see you are an attendee. You will need to unmute and you will have 5 minutes for your delegation and then questions from the committee.
Okay, thank you, sir. So I would like to talk to you about two locations, Montreal Street, I would like to bring your attention on. Two locations will be the cross on Sutherland Drive in Montreal, and the second one will be the cross on John Counter in Montreal. My intention here is to be safer for the pedestrian and safer for the car. So let's start with the intersection between Montreal Street and Sutherland Drive. At the north of the John Counter, there's 3 kilometers from John Counter to the 4-1 where there is no stop at all and only one pedestrian cross path. Along these 3 kilometers of street on Montreal, it's all about a house neighborhood. What I would like to bring to ensure the safer for the pedestrian and for the car would be, as a minimal option, is to bring a cross path for a pedestrian and the intersection of the Sutherland Drive in Montreal. For my understanding, this is the most logical and convenient location to get such cross path for different reasons. First one is Sutherland Drive is the only four-way on Montreal Street on that segment on the north of the John Counter Boulevard. Second reason is on the one side of that intersection, there's a one strip mall, one gas station, and on the other side there's a one bus stop. That means that met a really popular location and a lot of busy location for pedestrian. In addition to this, at the sidewalk on the north of Montreal Street ends at Sutherland. So when it ends at Sutherland Cross Street, there is no safe way for the pedestrian to change or to cross Montreal Street to reach the pedestrian path at the other side of the street there. And the last reason for that location, the pedestrian, is at the primary French school 1 kilometers west of that intersection. Although the pedestrian will be the ideal, the minimal option to increase the safety for the pedestrian, I do believe that the ideal solution would be to have some sort of a stop sign or set of lights in that intersection for slowing down the traffic, to give a safer way for the car from Sutherland to reach Montreal Street, and also to give opportunity for pedestrians to cross Montreal Street on a safer way. So in conclusion, for that location, I do believe that Montreal Street is not a boulevard. It's a street, it's a house neighborhood, it's a residential neighborhood, and it needs to be managed that way. We need to guarantee the safety of the pedestrian by allowing a cross path. Sutherland is a logical and convenient location to establish such cross path. And although a pedestrian is a minimal measures, I could think that the stop sign could have a better and ideal solution for the safety of that street. The second location I wanted to talk to you about is south of John Counter. There's a 200 meters on the north side of Montreal Street where there is no pedestrian path at all. So at the end of the building path is important for the following reason. First, at the end of the pedestrian of the north side, there is no safe way for the people reaching the end of the pedestrian to cross Montreal Street on that location. The safest way is to walk on the grass and to reach John Counter Boulevard. The second reason is there's no section, the section on that 200 meters for the street and for the cycle path on Montreal Street, it becomes smaller and smaller, then much more dangerous for the pedestrian who would like to walk on that street since there's no pedestrian path. And also, at the end of that 200 meters, there's a bus stop that requires the bus to go above the cycle path to get the passenger in and from the bus, which makes quite dangerous for the pedestrian to be there. So since there's a new bridge in construction, since it's a really busy bus stop at the end of the John Counter and Montreal Boulevard, since there's a new neighborhood just to be constructed, I do believe that 200 meters of pedestrian path need to be built. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Monsieur Boucher. You have provided local maps for the committee. They were on screen while you were speaking. I was looking at them myself. You were referencing suggestion for a signal or something similar at Sutherland and Montreal, and also a completed pedestrian walkway or sidewalk for the 200 meters south of John Counter on the side of Montreal Street where that does not exist. Is that a fair summary of your suggestions?
Yes, it is, sir.
Okay, so I open this up to what's in order is members of the committee may ask the delegation questions. 2 questions per member, and there is no staff involvement at this point. It is just a direct interaction with the delegate. Would anyone wish to ask a question? Councillor George.
Thank you for your presentation and for the maps that you provided and the that was really helpful because you helped us visualize and we know exactly where we're talking about. Can you just share, you mentioned the school, the French school. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of traffic flow that you have experienced and you just know that it's going on?
For the school, I did not see any traffic for that specific purpose, to be honest. I just noticed there was one school there and there might be another additional reason for that cross path to be built there, but I did not witness any specific students taking that cross path.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. I see Councillor Osanek. Sorry, Councillor Osterhoff is first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do want to thank the presenter for speaking on this. I'm very, very familiar with that area of roadway. I do acknowledge that there always seems to be some safety issues at Montreal and Sutherland, and have experienced them and observed them in many different ways. So I think there's substance to this concern here. I would like to know, obviously, if staff has any data on this as well, but we can talk about that after. I'm confused as to what school we have there, Mr. Chair. How come I don't know what school is involved here? What school is there?
The delegation can answer.
This is the French school. This is a French Catholic school between Montreal and Division. Rémy Gaulin is the school that I'm talking about.
So Rémy Gaulin is the all French Catholic school, Councillor Osterhoff.
Okay, I guess I don't know where it is. I just don't see it. I will look it up. I thought I knew that stuff, but okay, thank you for that.
Yes, it is a fairly new construction in the last 10 years, I believe. Are there any other questions for the delegation? Councillor Osanek?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, a question to Mr. Bouchard, and thanks very much for bringing these two areas to our attention. For the one at John Counter Boulevard and Montreal Street, I've zoomed in now. So were you saying the pathway should extend, like the sidewalk should extend 200 meters? Is that on the east side of Montreal Street? Because that's where the bus stop is, right? Is it?
Yes, it is. On the east side, you're right, madam.
Okay, and when you cross over John Counter, like you're on John Counter and you're crossing over Montreal Street, which is easier for pedestrians? Would it be like the north side of the intersection or the south side? Like, is there a pedestrian countdown on both sides if you're, like coming from the Tim Hortons going across Montreal or coming from the Bingo Plaza and going across?
I do believe the short shore, mostly because of the bus stop that is on the south side of the John Counter. I do believe that if there's a cross path, will be the ideal location would be there.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, when can we ask staff questions about this?
So I talked to the committee clerk, one of the committee clerks before the meeting about what is permitted at the various sections. So during delegations, what is permitted is questions and interaction with the delegation directly from members of the committee. For interaction with staff, it has to be related to the business items or the briefing. So when that moment comes up, it would be in order if it is relevant to the business item or the briefing. And I believe once we hear from staff, they will confirm that to be the case. And then we can discuss how this fits in with the report and briefing at that time, but not during delegations.
Okay, thank you.
Neil.
I think after all these meetings, I get this straight. Sorry about that. I was about to ask a similar question as Councillor Panic. But have we received a written copy of your presentation, complete with maps? If not, if I could suggest that you make that available through our clerk's department, that would be very helpful. So,
Mr. Boucher, if you could provide through an electronic copy and email a copy of those maps with the markings that were shown on the screen, or if they don't already have them, then they can be forwarded to members of the committee. What we have is just your letter. We don't even have that. We just have your name on the agenda.
Yeah, I have everything written here. I can certainly provide my notes with the arguments and the photo of the location I'm talking about at the right side of the argument. So that could make my arguments much more easier to follow. Sir, I can do this.
Okay, great, thank you.
thank you. Ian, Mr. Semple is here tonight, and he is the staff person, and there'll be an opportunity for us to get some clarity when he does his presentation. Because I was going to ask specifically, because the report, which we'll see is excellent, but it's not meant to be totally implemented for traffic calming until Q2 to next year. So clearly, there are situations such as you're suggesting that we need to address before that. And I'll be asking that question of Mr. Semple, so I'm giving him a heads up. So, but thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. And before, Mr. Boucher, before you go, just to clarify those two questions from the members of the committee as regards to staff, that this would be in the same category, your suggestions would be in the same category as all suggestions we received from members of the public in the various neighborhoods. And so it would be added to that list of suggestions, presumably. and staff would have a chance to address it directly to you through email or phone call, or also anything they might have to say about it tonight when that item is, when staff is speaking to that item. So I hope that is sufficient for the context. Do the members of the committee have any other thing to say to the delegation? Councillor Osterhoff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just Google mapping that intersection of John Counter and Montreal Street, and I see a very clear sidewalk in that area. Are we talking anything different than a pedestrian way there, 200 meters south of John Counter? It seems to me that there's a walkway all the way down to Cassidy and beyond, all the way there. So what is missing there?
So if I may, sir, what is missing is on the east side of Montreal, side of John Counter Street, there's a 2 meters, because along the Montreal Street, on each side of Montreal Street, there's a side path, there's a pedestrian path on each side. However, at the end of Montreal, on the south of the John Counter, on the east side of Montreal, there's a 200 meters with no pedestrian path that lead to John Counter there, and that may cause a problem because the end of the sidewalk, there's no option to cross back to Montreal or to reach John Counter, and it did leave us with no option at this point.
Okay, thank you. That helps me to see that. I mean, ultimately, I think there is work being done there in the bridge. I think there's some intersection work happening, so I'm not sure we need to be over involved there right now, but I don't know if that's it. But okay, thank you.
Yes, and as I said, when after staff have given the briefing, there's an opportunity to ask questions of staff at that point for members of the committee. And there's also, when it is a business item on the recommendation, an opportunity to interact with staff for members of the committee. However, for the delegation, this is the only time we can interact with him. So I guess that's it for questions. Thank you, Mr. Boucher. And you're please welcome to remain in the meeting and watch the remainder so that hopefully your questions can be addressed at that point.
Thank you very much for your time, sir. Well appreciated.
Okay. So that was delegations. Madam Clerk, is there any other delegation?
No, there isn't, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so then we move to item 6, which is briefings. There's a briefing from our Director of Transportation, Mr. Semple. And procedurally, I just have to say something. So the briefing, when we get to the 10-minute point, we'll have to pause the briefing. The procedural rules require consent of the committee to extend the briefing past the 10-minute limit because of the procedural bylaw. I would suggest at that time that members of the committee ask questions about the content of the first 10 minutes and that content only at that point, at that break, at the 10-minute break. And then the briefing can continue if the consent of the committee is given at that point. In this matter, we comply with the procedural bylaw of limiting the briefing to 10 minutes, but also to give a chance for some feedback from committee members at the 10-minute mark. Does that, you can indicate by nodding your head that that is an adequate way to deal with the procedure? Thank you. So with that, Mr. Semple, you have the floor, and at 10 minutes, I will stop you and we will ask for consent to extend. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The clerk will put up a presentation that accompanies my briefing tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee. My name is Ian Semple. I'm the city's Director of Transportation Services. Tonight, I would like to provide a briefing on the work that is underway on the city's traffic calming policy and process. You can go to the next slide. I'll provide background on the current policy and the intended role of the traffic calming program, followed by an overview of the review completed to date and recommended next steps for 2021. Next slide. As some background, the city's current transportation policies prioritize active transportation and transit ahead of personal vehicle use. However, Our existing transportation networks reflect the standards and policies that were in place at the time they were designed and constructed. The pieces of our transportation networks, the lifespan of which can be measured in decades, can take a long time to reflect the intention of the policies that are in place today. Next slide. Most roadways in the city, including the almost 600 kilometers of local roads in the city's residential and neighborhood areas, do not reflect this priority. This challenge is not unique to Kingston, as transportation networks in many other North American municipalities were largely built or rebuilt with car movement as the primary design consideration. Speeding is a direct outcome of this vehicle-centric design and is a prime concern raised by residents for the city to address. It is an issue that is best addressed with the correct design, but reconstructing our roadways to reflect the current priorities will take decades. Next slide. Many cities, including the city of Kingston, operate a traffic calming program that attempts to address concerns, often related to speed, as they arise, often with incremental changes that are designed to tamp down the speed of vehicles in a neighborhood. Traffic calming refers to measures and street design elements aimed at improving safety for all street users, particularly for those walking and cycling, by lowering vehicular operating speeds. Some of these measures are designed to be retrofit onto existing roadways to address issues ahead of a full roadway redesign. Examples of these measures include the installation of speed humps, bulb outs, signage, bollards, and education campaigns. Next slide. However, traffic calming is one of only a number of approaches that need to be used to solve transportation issues, especially at a neighborhood level. When used in conjunction with other tools, traffic calming can be very effective, but when used in isolation or in a piecemeal approach, it can shift the problem to other streets in the neighborhood and isn't always the most appropriate solution. Although an integrated, comprehensive approach to any transportation issue is the best approach, the city's existing traffic calming policy is presently the primary process for transportation issues raised by residents and councillors to be addressed. Last fall, when the AT implementation and road safety plans were approved, the traffic calming policy was identified as the first implementing policy that should be reviewed in the context of these new plans. Next slide. So this slide provides a visual of how the current process, the current traffic calming process should work. The current policy is intended to formalize and prioritize a selection of streets for traffic calming intervention from the larger set of requests that are received. It's meant to be a data-based, linear process where candidate streets are assessed, ranked, and measures are implemented where they're warranted. Next slide. In reality, the current traffic calming program is functioning in a more circular way, as represented in the purple flow chart shown on this slide. As you can see in this chart, the streets are assessed. However, when the ranking is completed, the process splits into two smaller sub-processes. The limited number of streets that are prioritized for implementation proceed as intended, although there have been instances when the traffic calming, once designed and implemented, either does not fully address the issue, leading to the street being resubmitted into the process again, or are rejected by the neighborhood and a removal is requested. More pressing, however, are the streets that are not prioritized. The residents on these streets, perhaps having waited several years to be selected for an assessment, are not typically content with the lower ranking they have been afforded, and often request additional information, assessment, and data. This reevaluation cycle can consume considerable resources and does not generally result in any ranking changes. Meanwhile, the number of transportation issues that require resourcing for initial follow-up and assessment outside of this adopted process is significant. The green flow chart shows the typical flow for a transportation issue through the city's customer service portal. In essence, a parallel, unresourced process is operating for streets that are not part of the traffic calming process, but where resident issues have been identified. In most cases, little or no action can be taken, and the request is reviewed in an ongoing manner. unless selected by a counselor for assessment or a broader capital project is planned that can address it. Next slide. When a street does make it onto the ranked traffic calming assessment list, it joins a long list of other streets that are awaiting intervention. The current roadway list stands at 61, and it's a mixed bag of candidates falling into 4 main themes. Number one, there are good candidates for traffic calming implementation under the current policy that could benefit from earlier or more expeditious intervention. The second category is roads where measured speed is comparatively low to other locations, including several roadways on the list that do not meet the minimum requirements set by the policy for volume. And these streets typically rank low on the list and are unlikely to ever be prioritized for intervention. The third category are roads with traffic calming measures already in place, but where concerns and requests for reassessment continue, suggests that the traffic calming measures appear to be ineffective in addressing the core issue. And the last category are arterial and collector roadways, where traffic calming measures are not typically appropriate. However, the roadways have been captured into the process to presumably capture neighborhood concerns. The backlog of assessed roadways that have accumulated since 2013 has impacted the city's ability to respond efficiently to new requests and is increasing the response time for warranted traffic calming implementation. This has created a cascading effect whereby traffic calming requests develop into treatment requests that are not as effective or appropriate, such as isolated speed limit reductions and unwarranted always stop requests. Next slide. For roadways that are prioritized for intervention, there's a limited number of measures that have been employed. Early traffic calming interventions under this program consisted primarily of speed humps. In an effort to reduce the backlog of assessed roadways, the approach by the city has expanded to include flexible bollards. However, even with these efforts, the requests and assessments far outweigh the ability of the city to respond under the current policy to all of the requests received. Next slide. This is perhaps best illustrated with some of the data related to the volume of requests and assessment versus the implementation that's been completed. The rate at which roadways are assessed and added to the list each year compared to the traffic calming measures being installed is approximately 3 to 1. And approximately 200 other requests are received outside of this process. Next slide. So from this preliminary review, the main issues as it relates to the effectiveness of the program appear to be that traffic calming is the primary process to which most transportation issues are directed, but in many cases, it may not be the most appropriate. There's an unsustainable rate of requests, both within and external to the traffic calming program, and resources are being diverted from other projects and programs to assess and reassess known issues. There's a focus on isolated segments rather than the broader neighborhood approach, which can create issues on neighboring streets. And the program has been misapplied in a number of instances as a holding area for transportation issues, where ongoing issues are reviewed in a cyclical way with no committed project or action to address. Next slide. As part of this preliminary review, earlier in the year, staff spoke with interested counselors about the existing policy to gauge its effectiveness. The general themes were as follows. There's a long delay between submission and assessment results being shared, coupled with an extended or unknown timeline for implementation of the measures due to the ranking process and limited annual investment. That said, there was a desire for a continued process where issues can be identified and submitted by the district councilor for assessment to prioritize the concerns that they are receiving. A desire for a more flexible approach and a policy that permits an increased level of responsiveness to transportation issues overall. And a desire to allow increased resident and stakeholder leadership on transportation-related matters in their neighborhood. Next slide. So as we prepare to review the policy that has been in place since 2013, we must review it against the updated transportation policies that have been put in place since that time and consider council's strategic priorities. These priorities include a direction to improve walkability, roads, and transportation, and specifically this includes enhancing public safety through active transportation and a focus on pedestrian access and enforcement. Traffic calming, when implemented correctly, can be a valuable tool to enhancing public safety, especially in neighborhood areas and school zones. Areas of common concern outlined in the city's road safety plan, active transportation plan, and this priority shown here. Next slide. At present, this council priority is being actioned through the AT implementation plan, the road safety plan, and safe route to school program. This work places emphasis on neighborhood transportation plans and upgrades to school zone areas. Traffic calming can be a valuable tool to enhancing public space and public safety in public space, especially in these two types of spaces. The staff are using this council priority to frame the work that is being done to review and recommend updates to the current traffic calming policy. Next slide. The traffic calming policy review will also include the update and development of a set of implementation processes, including public engagement components that recognize the differences in permanency of the measures considered. Although the work to update the policy is in the early stages, there are some initial approaches that are being explored that include an updated screening tool that better identifies candidate roadways for traffic calming earlier in the analysis and would more clearly set expectations of when action will or will not be taken. A broader toolkit of transportation interventions with an emphasis on minor and immediate works that could allow more expeditious intervention, even in an interim capacity, and public engagement that is framed around identifying the core issue or issues so a broader range of tools can be considered. All of this with a goal to provide a more expeditious reporting mechanism, even if the recommendation is to do nothing. Over the coming months, there'll be opportunities for the public and for councillors to engage on the development of this updated policy and process. Next slide. The expanded toolkit that will form part of the update is expected to include a full suite of traffic calming tools that span from minor adjustment measures to more permanent engineering-based applications. It will include the use of tools and programming that place leadership and responsibility for interventions with neighborhoods and community stakeholders. It will include strategies, devices, designs, and factors that can be used on a variety of roadways and in a variety of neighborhoods. And it's based on the research of the types of traffic calming measures used in other municipalities for various types of neighborhoods, cross sections, and roadway conditions. Next slide. One important piece of this toolkit is the minor adjustment measures. These measures are intended to be implemented more quickly to address concern and inform whether a longer-term fix is needed. We use some of these measures now in the city, but often individually or in a limited way. On your screen, you'll see a selection of those minor adjustment measures that are being explored. Next slide. The minor adjustment measures are particularly important in the short term. While this policy review is underway, the city is still planning interventions on several roadways in 2021. The recommended road segments for traffic calming come from the segments that ranked high on the existing traffic calming list. And these roadways are all within the neighborhoods that were identified in the AT implementation plan or adjacent to school zones. The recommended interventions will focus on minor adjustment measures in the AT prioritized neighborhood areas and existing school zones. It also includes work on 2 specific school zone issues using these minor adjustment measures to address these concerns. The locations are listed on this slide that you see here, and there's some additional discussion on the selections included in the report. Next slide. Design work on the 2021 projects outlined in the previous slide will begin in the coming months in tandem with the policy review. The locations will be implemented in Q2 and Q3 next year. And the updated policy is expected to be presented to the EITP committee in Q2 2021 and could allow any new or modified assessment process to be in place for the latter half of the year. It's recommended that new assessments under the current process be suspended until the current review is complete. This will allow staff to deliver on the recommended 2021 projects and the updated policy without adding further roadways to an already extensive list. Next slide. That's the end of my briefing, Mr. Chair. I'm available for questions. I also have with me tonight Marissa Mascaro and Matt Cusson, who are members of the Transportation Services Department, and Ms. Kidd, the Commissioner, is also available.
Thank you, Mr. Semple. So do you have a second part to your briefing, or is that the complete briefing?
That is the complete briefing.
Okay, so first I need consent of the committee. That was a 15-minute briefing to exceed the 10-minute limit. All those in favor? Okay, so that's a good thing, seeing as you went to 20 to 15 minutes. So now we have questions from members of the committee. And this is a staff briefing, so it's only members of the committee permitted to ask questions. There's no limit to the number of questions, but I propose we go 2 at a time. And if we have more than 2 each, we will do multiple rounds. So each councillor that I recognize will have 2 questions. If your questions are to the content of the report or the briefing, great. But do not get ahead of yourself and begin discussions on the recommendations at this segment, because this is questions to the briefing. First, I see Councillor Neal.
Great, thank you very much. A couple of things. First of all, that was an excellent presentation. Could you make the slide deck and the report shared with probably all of council so that we can share it with constituents who have questions regarding this? That would be great. And if the clerks could take care of that, that'd be fantastic. I'm curious about a couple of things. There's a very active group right now on Regent Street that are gathering a petition. And one of the issues there is that what was a street that was primarily middle-aged people and not a lot of children is going through a kind of conversion, and there's now lots of children on the street and seniors on the street as well, including some that are have mobility issues. Are you able to take those kinds of issues into account when you review the need for traffic calming?
Thank you for your question, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we can certainly make the slide deck available through the clerk's office, so we can take care of that, no problem. Related to your question about Regent Street, and I think in general, when we see changes in the users or the way in which a street is being used, that can often create some concerns or some conflict between users of that road. That is part of what we will be looking at in this review. So I think when we look at council's priorities, but we also look at the policies that exist in our official plan and in our transportation policies, there's a clear priority set for the users and how they will be treated. And that is, the first priority being those that are walking or moving on their own, kind of on the road, those that are cycling, our transit use, and then personal vehicles. And so that priority is embedded in the policies that we have in place now. And I think considering those users, especially vulnerable users like children or elderly users, is part of what we're looking at with ways in which we could intervene on some of those streets with these measures.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I'll make some more comments when we get to when it's on the floor. Thank you.
Okay, continuing on with questions from members of the committee to staff about the briefing. Councillor Oosterhoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, thank you, Mr. Semple. That was excellent. I really appreciate the presentation, and I'm always getting up to speed, I think, on the incredible work that has to be done in an evolving time in our society. And I do appreciate some of the things that I'm hearing in the sense that I haven't really experienced much interaction with you, or my constituents. And I would like to just to enhance that a little bit. I think it's really respectful to include residents here, and that they live it. And in the rural area, sometimes we kind of get forgotten, I think, and I don't want to always beat that drum, but but traffic does impact the rural area as well. I certainly understand Councillor Neal's things of how residential subdivisions evolve, and then it's a slow shift, but all of a sudden it's here. And sometimes in the rural area, we probably see that faster, where we have a lot of speeding issues. I blame all of South Frontenac for that. They're all racing out to get back out to South Frontenac, but we have it, and sometimes I feel we forget to implement your minor adjustments. And so I just want to highlight that you've mentioned it, because I think it's really important. Messaging is so important to drivers today, and I think it works. We have, Jackson Mills, for example, while we went down to one lane to slow it down there. And now I think we really have a serious issue that's kind of growing with that's a sudden change, where maybe we can take too long when there's safety issues at Highway 401 and 38. That intersection with McIver Road, and how it goes south to Harpel Road and to Jackson Mills Road. And so I'm wondering is that up to me to kind of push that, or are you guys on top of the sudden changes of where safety is all of a sudden a red light issue almost, and I just wondered how to address that.
Mr. Sample.
Thank you for your question, and through you, Mr. Chair. So I think with what Councillor Oosterhoff is asking, as it relates to the way in which the program would look at consulting with residents, or even expanding beyond that in the involvement of residents, we know that messaging about education and promotion are very important pieces of a more holistic kind of transportation program. It's very important for active transportation, and particularly important for transit as well. But some of what we have heard from councillors, but also from members of the public through the issues that they're raising, is that even small interventions, or small ways in which the issue could at least be acknowledged, is very important to them. And that in a process, if a process is too long, or if they're not prioritized in the process because their issue is not as, like a word, as high priority or as extreme as some maybe on other roadways, there is still a desire amongst engaged residents to take some form of action and to feel involved in a process. And so part of what we are looking at in the suite of traffic calming tools are ways in which residents and community stakeholders can be engaged in some measures within their neighborhood or on their street prior to a broader kind of intervention for traffic calming measures or reconstruction of the roadway, so that there's an acknowledgement of the issue and some way that they can be involved. To the second part, and I should say, and so we've started some of that. An example of that is things like the Quiet Streets program that was run through KCAT this summer, areas where schools or neighborhoods are converting or want to convert streets into play streets during certain times of the day, and showing that their street is important to them and they want to change it in some way. So that's some of the pieces that we're looking at in the way that we can, at the very least, I think, acknowledge the concerns, even when the data, when measured against the other streets that have been raised, do not support an immediate intervention. To your second question, I think addressing issues, transportation issues, traffic issues, or safety issues, in particular on our major roadways or arterial roadways is typically beyond the scope of the traffic calming program. I think what you're talking about is a more pressing transportation issue that might arise. When those are brought to the city's attention through the council or through customer service, we're reviewing that and assessing those safety concerns at least initially for any that we receive. If there's an immediate safety issue that needs to be addressed, such as a roadway repair or some deficiency that has appeared, then there's ways in which that action is taken. But this program is more talking about how you reflect the policies of the city onto the infrastructure that's already built. And so that's where there's a bit of a difference, not in that there's not a feeling of that there's an issue of safety, but also how do we reflect the policies in the roads and pathways and areas in which people are moving around our city. And that's where there can be a lag or a period of time that it takes for that.
Yeah, understood. That's helpful. I did know that. And the major stuff we can bring to you through different routes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Huff. I think for the benefit of all committee members, we should spend a little bit more time on one thing that the director just said. It's in the report, it was in the briefing, and he just said it in response to Councilor Strauss' question, but it can't be stressed enough, and I want to just have it clarified further. And that is what happens when residents bring concerns that happen to be on what are classified in the official plan as arterial roads. Examples of this would be Sir John A. Macdonald, Bath Road, Johnson Street, Highway 38, pretty much every major road going north-south into countryside, Councilor Huff, designated arterial. And then what traffic calming from the briefing is actually meant to do and what it can do and what it can't do. So there is some information in the report regarding some arterial suggestions from either district councilors or residents. And I would like the director to give us a bit more clarity on how those fit into this proposed policy. Arterial road suggestions from the community.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for your question. So I think in general, the traffic calming approaches that we're talking about here in the report or that exist in the current traffic calming policy are not usually appropriate for higher speed roadways or arterial roadways where there's a large volume of vehicles, multiple lanes, and a very car-centric design that exists. So when we receive those issues, if you recall on the slide that I showed, there was sort of those two processes, the purple process that was the traffic calming process, but the more general transportation issue process that's raised with the city. So when we receive a concern, either through a councillor or from a member of the public, we do assess that concern. We might complete a site visit. We would gather some data, but in most cases, traffic calming, as we define it, and the program that exists right now, is not appropriate and wouldn't apply. So for issues as it relates to an arterial roadway or a higher speed roadway, they are largely addressed either with some education or signage that can be added to raise awareness of the concerns that have been brought up, but are primarily addressed through either the reconstruction of the roadway or the addition of crossings or other features to the roadway that would be part of larger capital projects. So in most cases, these issues are noted, they're monitored. We manage them in the broader capital program, but they're not addressed or fully addressed until there's a larger project that can more fully sort of reconstruct or address the design issues that are there on that roadway.
Okay, so does that mean that councillors, when they receive a question or a suggestion from a resident, and it happens to be an arterial road where the problem has been noted, should we be giving them that feedback immediately, that there's a different process for arterial roads?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think, yes, that would be fine for you to share that information. That's also information that staff can share back to the resident as part of our initial assessment or initial review. We can be more clear that it's not really appropriate for traffic calming, and that these issues are longer term systemic issues that get addressed as part of multi-year programs or longer term programs. This, I think, as I'm sure that you and many of the councillors can appreciate, is a difficult conversation to have with residents, especially as the city adopts and starts to implement more active transportation and transit related processes. So and projects. So we see sections of the city that are converting to become more transit and more AT friendly, and a desire for that to be in place on all of the roadways. So staff are happy to kind of help manage those expectations, provided there's an understanding that those interventions on our higher order roadways are much more complex and are linked with much larger programs.
I think most residents intuitively know that the high volume roadways require more care, more thought, more planning. But what they don't know is the internal designation that each roadway has, whether they're an arterial or not. And it seems crucial, at least to this policy, it seems almost central to the policy, because traffic calming is meant to be implemented on non-arterial roadways. And outside of that, it needs to be adapted. It's not 100% clear to me, but I'll leave that there for now and go to other members of the committee, and we'll have a chance to delve more into that later. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I have a whole bunch of questions, so I'll keep it to two. And thanks, Ian, Mr. Sample, for your presentation. As you probably feel yourself, I even emailed you today about a street that I've been talking to you about, or a couple of streets actually that I've been talking to you about since being elected. And in fact, I remember standing in one of those streets, door knocking for the election, and I could feel that there was a traffic problem on one particular street that I have in mind at the moment, because I could feel I was in a neighborhood community street, and here there were cars just zooming behind me, and it didn't, and so the traffic didn't match a family kind of oriented street. And so I have written to you and spoken to you about streets, and you made that clear in the report too, that there's so much time is spent on revisiting and reassessing streets. And so my questions is about, you mentioned there are streets that are low on the list that will never get done. But how do we know that some of our streets are those streets, and how do we communicate that to residents who may feel very, very different about that? And I do like the idea of including residents in the process. But I am also concerned, and you hear this all the time when we have public engagement sessions, and we say this is to hear the input from the public, and then we walk away and we do what we had planned anyhow. So I think if we have public engagement, it needs to be genuine, and we need to have room to act on what we hear. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So I think just before I get to your question, Councillor Doherty, I think your comments about the way a neighborhood feels and the way that a street feels, or the way it should feel versus how it actually feels, is often the way that staff hear the issue represented by residents to us. And that is where there can be a disconnect in the current process in the way that we assess that data-based approach. Oftentimes, especially on some of the smaller neighborhood streets, the actual speed information that will come back is near or within the speed limit that exists and the limit that the street may or may not have been designed for. And so, there are many streets where there's a 50-kilometer-an-hour speed limit and the average measured speed is 55 kilometers per hour. But the issues are very real and present for the residents that are there. But when ranked against all of the other concerns that have come into the city, it will ultimately rank lower because of the factors that might exist on that street versus the other street. And so, but providing all of that data, providing all of that information, it still does not get at the resident specific concern, because they still feel that their street is not operating in the way that they would expect it to operate for a neighborhood street. And that's kind of the crux of what the issue is, because I think there are, as I said, like 600 kilometers of local roads in the city, many of which were built with a vehicle-centric design. So that was the intent of the existing policy, was to try and rank and prioritize that so that we could get at the most pressing issues. And I think to answer your question about, so yes, staff are spending a great deal of time, we are spending time assessing the requests that come in, but we are spending a great deal of time reassessing, providing data, and providing information to residents that just reinforces where they are ranked on the list, but doesn't address their concern. And so I think when you look at the report, Exhibit B of the report includes the list of all of the traffic calming assessed roadways that we've completed under this process that still remain or still are waiting for some kind of intervention. In the report, we talk about that on average, we complete 3 or 4 interventions a year, but we assess on average 15 streets under this process, and that's not considering all of the other requests we receive. So if we're only taking 3 streets off this list, but adding approximately 15 to it each year, those streets that are probably ranked, 10 or lower, do not have the opportunity for them to rise to the top rank so that we can make an intervention on them is low. So streets that are on the list and then continue to remain on the list year after year, residents can also, they become frustrated when there's no sense of the timing of when that intervention will occur. And it is difficult. Staff cannot provide a committed timeline because as new streets are assessed, that ranking changes. Your last question, I think your last question was as it relates to public engagement. So yep. There are 2 pieces that I think are key here. There is a previous version of the traffic calming policy. It's not discussed in this report, but the original version of it that was put in place in 2007 included a mechanism whereby neighborhood residents were sort of polled, and there was a certain percentage of people that had to agree for traffic calming to go in if it was going to be executed or not. The 2013 policy update removed that sort of polling piece of it because it was found that there was oftentimes quite a split between neighbors that wanted the intervention and neighbors that wanted it to be left alone. And so it was becoming difficult to actually implement any of these pieces because because of sort of neighborhood or street level disagreement about whether an intervention at all was required. So the engagement that we're talking about here, it relates to how can we put a process together that best reflects what residents how they would like to, how the traffic calming process can be more effective and how that can work for a neighborhood, but also recognizing that there's limited resources, or resources are limited always, but the degree to which the city can intervene on all of the requests that we receive we're not going to be able to intervene on all the requests we receive. And so part of what we have heard is, in addition to trying to engage on whether traffic calming is warranted or not for your street and what type of traffic calming would be put in place, there's also a desire from some residents and from some stakeholder groups to, if they are ranked lower or if their street is not warranted for any measure of intervention, there is still a desire to acknowledge the issue, either on the street or in the neighborhood, and they are looking for some tools to be able to do that. So we don't have all the details of what that is going to look like, but the engagement is, and some of these tools, it envisions allowing residents and neighborhoods to take on a measure of action, so to speak, within some defined parameters to acknowledge and address the issue that may be there. So that could include things such as lawn signs. It could include driver feedback signs. It could include some variations of the Quiet Street program or street program that allows the residents to change the way the street is used for certain periods of time. So I think we're also trying to acknowledge that there's a desire, even if a street is ranked low on the list, there may be an engaged group of residents that still wish to take some action or at least acknowledge the concerns that have been raised. And we want to make sure that there's an avenue for that doesn't just require us telling them that they're number 47 on the list.
Thanks.
I think Councillor Sanik, did you have your hand up earlier? Yes, it's Councillor Sanik, then Councillor Holland, and then we could go to a second round if needed. Go ahead, Councillor Sanik.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. Like Councillor Doherty, I have 8 questions, so I'll ask my first 2 questions in round 1. My first question is just kind of clarification. Mr. Semple, so with this recommendation, one of it is that the traffic calming future is going to be deferred for a year until 2021. And in April of this year, in 2020, during COVID, we submitted 2 more streets for traffic calming analysis. So does that mean that the streets we submitted in April, are they still going to be analyzed and brought to us in 2021? Or are the 2 streets we all submitted in April not going to be heard then until 2022, when hopefully the new policy comes into effect? How does that work? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so the traffic calming assessment process in 2020 was suspended or deferred for a variety of reasons related to the COVID response. One of which is our travel patterns and traffic patterns changed significantly during the times where we normally complete those assessments. In this report, staff are recommending that we not complete any of these new assessments. So the streets that you would have identified in 2020, that we not complete those assessments. We typically would complete these assessments either in the spring or the fall of 2021. So we're recommending that we not complete any additional assessments while we're in the midst of this policy review. This would allow us to focus on the policy review, but also allow us to focus on the project work that we've identified, and avoid adding additional roadways to the list that is already growing at a somewhat unmanageable rate. So we'd prefer not to add additional streets and to assess additional streets to add to the list now, so that we can instead review those streets as part of the new process, which we would recommend in Q2.
Thank you. So that's Q2 of 2021 then.
Through you, Mr. Chair, so the new process, so the work is started now in reviewing the traffic calming policy. The intent is to bring the updated policy back to committee by Q2 of 2021.
Okay, thank you. And the other part of the report where it says that in addition to the city councilors submitting up to 2 streets per year for traffic calming assessments, that from, I think it was August last year until September this year, staff get, directly from residents to staff about 196 requests. Yeah, like I had no idea. I think this is new information for all of us. And I just wondered, in those 196 requests, like 200, on average per year, is it sometimes requests for the same street? So for instance, I know like one of our hotspots right now in my district is Woodbine Road. So for 196 of those requests, would there sometimes be like maybe 20 residents on one street submitting that same street? Or would that be 196 requests all for like 196 different streets?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it is. So the requests that we receive, we would receive multiple requests for individual streets, especially if there's an engaged group of residents that are anxious to see some action or intervention. But the requests the transportation issue requests come from across the city. I do have an image that I can share of that if the clerk can put the presentation up, if you'd like to see a visual of that, Councillor Osanek. But it basically reflects concerns that come in from across the city.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. No, I understood they were from across the city. I just wondered if they were 196 individual streets or if some of those requests were from the same street. And you just said that it could be multiple requests from the same street. And I think knowing what those streets are would be helpful to us as councillors, because where I get my information from mostly was going door to door during the 2018 election. And I got, like, I know our term is 4 years, 2 streets a year, that's 8 streets. And I think I got 8 streets, if not 10 streets, going door to every single house, people saying, hey, can you assess our street for traffic calming? So I would be very interested to see what streets are on this 196 list, because maybe there's some streets in my district that people have given directly to staff that, they weren't home when I knocked on the door, or they don't know me, that I'm their counselor. And who is our counselor? I have no idea. I'm going to go contact us and try to submit the street that way. It was like the more knowledge, and we're trying to share and increase communication, I think it would really help us as counselors to know what streets they are. And I totally get it that they're right across the city, and that's fine too, because all of us drive right across the city. Would that be possible?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can certainly share that information about the requests that are received. So this would be the range of, I think, issues, transportation issues that have been brought up by residents, generally through the city's customer service portal, but sometimes directly to staff. It would also include requests that we've received via a counselor that we've then generated into our customer service system. But we can certainly share those that range of information if that's of interest. And it reflects concerns that we receive from a transportation or a speed standpoint, and then also specific requests for traffic.
Yep, terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, it's Councillor Holland, and then we'll go to a second round of questions. Remember, everyone's doing a good job being specific to the policy in front of us and the briefing that we just received. And we obviously have many questions, keeping in mind we're not even at the business item yet. We're just at questions to the briefing. So Councillor Holland, 2 questions, and then we'll go to a second round. And if we go to a second round, you will go first because you went last this time. So you actually have up to 4 questions at this point. Go ahead.
Well, that's lucky for everyone because I only have 2. I have one request. I'm really sorry, Ian. Could you possibly forward your presentation to me? I was in another meeting, wasn't able to be here for the first part. Not urgently, but just at some point, that would be wonderful. Or if clerks could do that, that'd be great. And then my question is, the first question, in the section on next steps, page 8 of the report, so prioritizing the work within neighborhood transportation plan areas and school zones. I'm curious because just a year or so ago, maybe 2, I know there was a lot of work done with the public with outreach at the community level to try to get a good sense of what the concerns were. So there were these neighborhood walks that staff were involved in, and they were really well received in the community. And I'm curious if that information is going to be, that was to be included in the neighborhood transportation plan, I thought. And so is that information something that will be informing the policy?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, some of the work that you're referencing, Councillor Holland, relates to some of the secondary planning work that was completed by the city's planning department. Our transportation team is involved closely with our planning team on any of these secondary plans. So that information does flow back and forth between those departments. So yes, those themes and those issues are always shared back into transportation. I think as it relates to the neighborhood transportation plans, those are the areas that were identified in the city's active transportation implementation plan. So and the school zones, so it's the neighborhood transportation plans that are in the active transportation implementation plan, but then more broadly across the city into any of the school zones that would be there. So those are the 2 priority areas that we're looking at as a way to help in the screening process for where we would take and prioritize traffic calming interventions, so that there is an acknowledgement of I think it was Councillor Neal that raised it, of some of the more vulnerable users that may be in and around these areas, and how that can be weighted in any kind of prioritization or decision making. So there would be more details on that and the way that we would approach that as part of the group.
Great, thank you. And then the next question, so the report references the very local level, like street level concerns and initiatives, as well as the previous policy that was kind of a district-wide approach. And I'm sure other councillors had different ways of managing how they prioritize, but I'm just wondering if when we get this policy, like the kinds of outreach that would be required to get really a good sense of like the real granular level information that we want to get from the public would take quite a lot of. In some neighborhoods, maybe it's not, maybe it's easy to get that information. Maybe folks are interested and willing to come out to a meeting or engage however, but in some neighborhoods that may not be the case. And I'm just curious about how we might be able to be as inclusive as possible with that data.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for your question. So I think that there's one thing that we're not seeing is sort of a lack of information or a request coming in from members of the public from across the city. So but I think the nuance in it is that many of the requests we receive are focused on a particular solution versus actually understanding what the core problem is there. So most requests come in as, I want a crosswalk at this location, or we need to reduce the speed limit should be 30 kilometers an hour in this neighborhood, or I would like traffic calming at this location and an all-way stop. So we often receive a solution and a request to implement it. And we have to do a lot of work. We work back quite a bit to try and understand what the core issue is, because the suggestion that is made, while helpful, I think may not be the best solution, especially, and this is one of the issues with the way that block level traffic calming can be problematic, is some of the solutions or prescribed solutions may just shift the problem to a neighboring street or area, which only then starts the cycle again. So I think that we do not lack for suggestions and requests, but it can be difficult to understand what the core issue is that has triggered the request to come in. So that I think requires some more thought about the way that we could get at some of those pieces.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And that, what he just said, speaks to the entire rationale for having an evolved traffic calming policy, as is suggested by this report. And that would be the case if we approve the new traffic calming policy. So just before we go any further, Mr. Semple, if I understand the recommendation correctly, and we're not at the recommendation yet, right, guys? We're still at the briefing. But just to use the context of the briefing for the recommendation, the timing is that if we approve the recommendation today, we get an actual policy to approve at the end of Q2 2021, so roughly 8 months hence. Is that correct?
Through Mr. Chair, yes, that's the intent of the timing where we are right now.
Okay, so we'll get back to that when the recommendation is on the floor. I'll make it clear what we're actually discussing. In the meantime, more questions from members of the committee. I'm going to go in reverse order. So Councillor Doherty, you get to go first.
Thank you. And through you also, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to mention that Councillor Kiley is here and he would like to ask questions as well, if possible.
Okay, I will, after your questions, I will go to Councillor Kiley because he didn't get a chance in the first round, I guess.
He can go ahead of me if I'm fine with that too.
Okay, well, members of the committee, can I have your consent to go to a visiting councillor at this point? Yes. Okay, so thank you, very gracious Madam Vice Chair. So Councillor Kiley, you're on with your questions to staff about the briefing and report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the committee for having me. I listened intently and have a few follow-ups from what Councillor Holland asked and Councillor Osanek. I was thinking a few similar things. One is I'm wondering about the Safe Route to School program that the Transportation Department's worked on. I'm wondering how that fits with some of the minor traffic calming measures that were referenced. So that's my first question. And my second one is about the new assessments. Councillor Osanek was wondering how that impacts roads that were suggested in 2020. I'm wondering how that impacts the roads that were listed on the slide, for example, Development Drive, Trudell Road that are in my district. Will those ones go forward? So those are my two questions.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so the Safe Routes to School program, I mean, it is a program that is intended to exist in a neighborhood that benefits from interventions that traffic calming can complete. So they work in tandem. It fits into that neighborhood approach that we talk a lot about trying to take a review that is more broad across the neighborhood rather than specific to a street or a block. So the Safe Routes to School program includes, so as part of the process, it develops a Safe Routes to School action plan. And some of the actions that are contained in that plan could very well be traffic calming measures, but it also can extend to other different types of programs or pieces that would go in at that neighborhood level. So I think it kind of speaks back to it's important that we consider traffic calming is one of many transportation related tools that we can use within a neighborhood, but we should not presume or assume that it would be the sole or single intervention that would address the issue. Oh, and your second question, as it relates to the individual streets that are identified for traffic calming and assessment or design and implementation in 2021, the intent is that those streets move forward. So Trudell and Development and the other streets that are listed. And the way in which they would move forward, we've not yet completed any of the design work, so to speak, on those pieces, but the intent is to draw from those minor adjustment measures that were outlined in the report as a means to implement and assess further about what could be about how the issue could be addressed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Kiley, and please feel free to stick around. We will go now to the Vice Chair, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So 2 quick questions. One is neighborhoods, they sometimes overlap. And how do we, I wonder if you could speak to that. And then the other part is—
Sorry, Councillor Doherty, could you repeat that question? Your video cut out halfway through.
Okay, so thanks. Neighborhoods sometimes overlap different districts. So there might be a few, 2 or 3 councillors that are part of that or connect with the neighborhood. So I wonder if you could speak to that, Mr. Semple. And then the other question is, there's been, in our strategic priorities, we also mentioned enforcement. I wonder if you could speak to that as well. So enforcement as well as overlap of districts or neighborhoods.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, in the way that some of I think the neighborhood focus areas or transportation planning areas are identified, there may be instances where they overlap some of the districts. In most, if not all cases, the transportation areas are bounded either by a natural barrier or a natural boundary, like a lake or a stream or a wetland, or a major roadway, an arterial roadway that sort of encompasses either the neighborhood or segments of the neighborhood. And the intent is that we would kind of work within those areas that are bounded by those barriers, so to speak. In those instances, we have very few sections where they overlap, I think, between districts, but we would sort of engage both councillors, I think, as part of many of those discussions in the development of the neighborhood plan. We've yet to do a great deal of work on the neighborhood plans and develop kind of that process for it beyond some of the initial Safe Routes to School pieces. So I think we would better define that as we get moving on those pieces. The second question, as it relates to enforcement, enforcement certainly is a component of ensuring that the policies that are in place are followed. It's especially important when the design of the roadway or the right-of-way does not necessarily lend itself to that behavior. And so any kind of moving violation is sort of under the purview of Kingston Police or the police. But we are exploring a number of automated enforcement approaches. So the city is actively working on a red light camera program for implementation right now, and we will be bringing an information report as it relates to automated speed enforcement or photo radar the photo radar tool is certainly of more interest at the neighborhood level in being able to enforce or address those concerns. But in the interim, the city does, we work with and share information with the Kingston Police about areas that are being brought to our attention as where there may be speeding or other concerns, and vice versa. Collision information and other traffic or incident information is shared to the city as by the police so that we can identify any concerns that are arising there. So we are sharing information, but I think as it relates to enforcement measures led by the city, those are forthcoming as it relates to the automated programs.
Thanks.
Okay, so then it would be Councillor Osanek. Supplemental questions about the briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My next two questions are, Mr. Semple, you mentioned driver feedback signs. Is that the same thing as the radar speed display sign? Is that the same word for it?
Through Mr. Chair, yes, those are the same types of devices. So these would be installed in a neighborhood, and they display the speed that the vehicle is traveling.
Okay, great. So my question is about like the driver feedback signs that you mentioned. In the other municipalities like Loyalist, or I was just in Ottawa on the weekend, the radar display signs, they flash when your car's going over the limit. They light up with like, you know, all the way across, and they flash, 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 and ours don't. Do you think as part of this policy, we could get some of those signs so that they're more noticeable and kind of more in your face and really draw attention to the fact that you're going over the speed limit?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so I think the driver feedback signs, I know there are a variety of models that are available. We are looking at ways that we can expand those pieces. That would be part of the minor tools that we could bring in. So certain types of those type of kind of illumination or the way that it's notifying the vehicle driver, we can look at those pieces as part of the driver feedback signs we consider.
Great, thank you very much. And my second question is about a grid system for the way that new neighborhoods can be developed. So like, we know that subdivisions right now are sometimes being built with long straightaways, and then there's no opportunity to actually bring in, you know, like four-way stop signs, for example, because it's just one long straightaway, and then it just opens up, you know, traffic calming issues right there at the very beginning when a subdivision is built. So do you think as part of the, I know we're hiring a consultant for, you know, to bring about the policy, do you think that it could even go down to the level of brand new subdivisions and see if maybe we can do it more in a grid system where you can have, you know, like a four-way intersections that might help or prevent speeding issues in a brand new subdivision right from the beginning?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the scope of the work that the consultant will be looking at is related to how the tools that we design in or add onto a retrofit onto existing streets. The point that you are making, Councillor Osanek, is very valid in that we are constructing streets, and there are streets that are approved and designed and are under construction that may very well have traffic and speed related issues once they're complete. And so the piece that you are speaking to is, how do we get at the core design of the roadways, the way that the network that we're building, and then the right of way itself? Many of those pieces sort of lay in the city's subdivision design guidelines and our cross designs that we complete. That is important work to do as well. I don't have a timeline on when that work would be completed, but it is not part of what we're having this particular consultant look at for us as part of the program.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
And now, Neil, second round of questions, go ahead.
Thank you. A couple of things. First of all, as you're probably aware, and most counselors are, everybody seems to need or want traffic calming, but most people hate speed bumps unless they're the next block over. So I'm wondering how we can, what other alternatives are there to speed bumps that we could recommend? I know speed bumps are the cheapest way to achieve traffic calming, but it definitely moves the problem over to the next street. So perhaps you could comment on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so that is part of the work that is underway, and we will ask that's part of the discussion that we will have with the consultant and as part of the engagement. You are correct that the speed hump is one of the lower cost or the cheaper ways that we can intervene. It also can be very effective in slowing vehicle speed down on that street. But as you know, it can also be very effective at moving the issue to the nearby street. So I think we would review alternatives to speed humps, but I think it's also about how we would approach the use of speed humps in conjunction with a number of other tools at the same time. So that could include, some of the bulb outs that we've been doing, some addition of flexible bollards, line painting, all of those other pieces that when used together or work in tandem can certainly signal to any of the users, but especially drivers, that this is a different space and you need to behave differently.
And my second question, clearly that the majority of neighborhood people that you talk to want cars to slow down. And the default speed limit continues to be 50 kilometers, which on quiet residential streets is in my mind, is far too fast. I know when I brought this up, I think before you were the director, the discussion, the comments that were made regarding trying to reduce the speed to 40 or whatever, was that we would have to put a speed limit sign on every block in the city, and it was just far too expensive. But I know some communities have done, successfully, have done speed limit signs at the entrance to a neighborhood, so with far fewer signs than on every block. Have you looked into that? And I know Hamilton does it and some other communities do it.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I think speed limit reductions or community safety zones and the speed limits associated with those pieces are part of what would be reviewed that we're looking at. I don't have a specific answer about implementation components of that, other than to note that the speed limits, setting a speed limit in the absence of design changes, other measures, or in particular enforcement, are limited in their effectiveness. So reductions in speed limit may in the future best be coupled with some of our automated enforcement features or design changes. I note as well that Commissioner Kidd has her hand raised if she would like to add to my answer.
Commissioner Kidd, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the councillors for this long overdue discussion. Councillor Neal, to your question, I also don't think I was involved with the department at the time, but I do recall one of the reasons given for not wanting to drop the speed limit was about sort of what we call street clutter with signs, but it was more to the point, I think, the fact that if the street is designed to accommodate a higher speed, then it's sort of defeating the purpose if you don't change the design somehow and post a speed limit that people will just probably ignore if they tend to be speeders anyway. And then it gets us back into that constant cycle of enforcement requests. And you, council may recall, there was a presentation made a couple of times. I can't recall the delegate's name off the top of my head, but he talks a lot about the traffic calming and safe pedestrianism movements coming out of Amsterdam. And it really does go back to design. So it was more than street clutter and signage. I just wanted to remind council of that. And I think that, so Mr. Semple has already answered that question after I put my hand up, but I think just to reinforce this, I think this approach that staff is recommending is to try to find a combination of strategies that will work well together and not rely on one single thing, such as reducing a speed limit and then hoping that that has the effect that we're looking for.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. I believe the resident you're speaking to, he's appeared before this committee before. I think you're talking about Michael Capon, because he brought us information from the Netherlands at his last presentation, I believe.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe that's correct. Thank you.
Yes, and that point can't be emphasized enough. It is in the report and it was in the briefing as well. If the street is designed for a certain speed, a speed limit sign will not change that. And that explains in great part why speed limit reductions are not always effective. Now, Councillor Osanik's point about we haven't explored all the different options in the speed warning signs, the flashing ones and the ones that make a big deal when you break the speed limit. Those also we haven't used in Kingston, so that's another way to go to further reinforce what we've already tried. But I believe that the street design aspect is actually external. In many ways, it's external, especially on the arterial roads, to the scope of the traffic calming. Is that fair to say, Commissioner? That the street design changes that might be needed to get compliance with lower speed limits would be major infrastructure changes, not necessarily envisioned to be, especially on arterials, to be completed by the traffic calming policy. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's somewhat correct, and I would ask Mr. Semple to complement my answer, but I think in terms of things that we can move on that are more short-term, it's definitely beyond scope. But there's recognition that some of those short-term measures are by definition short-term and will give some degree of assistance, but won't actually correct the problem. So I don't think it's beyond the scope necessarily, but I think that the longer fix to the transportation problem that might be identified would require some sort of engineering solution. And that could be triggered when, as Mr. Semple has said, when road reconstruction or construction is identified for a location. But it may also be, in some circumstances, a longer term plan, but it could be installation of things like bulb outs and things like that could still be part of it. But knowing that those things take a lot longer to plan. And if I understand staff's approach to this, what they're suggesting is that the shorter term measures are good trials to see the effectiveness. They're low cost, they're more quickly implemented to see if you're getting the desired effect, and then that might lead to a more longer term solution over the course of time.
Great, thank you. And I think Councillor Neal and I would both witness and attest to the effectiveness of the low budget bollards on Brock and Johnson, and also on King, the center bollards on King. And I'm thinking about the pier. Very effective, low budget interim measures, possibly permanent measures if the bollards become permanent. But that is, as I understand, part of the minor treatments that staff can implement on short notice and also on a temporary basis to deal with some of these identified issues. But I guess we've already talked about that. So at this point, we've had 2 rounds of questions about the briefing. Does anyone have the appetite for a 3rd round of questions, or should we go to the recommendation perhaps and get more to the practical side of things with what are we going to vote on tonight? So if you want another question, raise your hand. Okay, we'll go to the 3rd round of questions. Those were very quick hands, so they must be important questions. Councillor Osanek, you go first.
Thank you. My next question is just to wrap up the what we heard from the delegation from Mr. Boucher tonight. And I just wondered, for those 2 pedestrian crossways that he's asking about and finishing the sidewalk another 200 meters on the east side, south of John Counter along Montreal Street, do staff have that on their radar? Is that identified in any of the like the 4-year infrastructure plan, or was it decided to maybe leave it into the next 4-year infrastructure plan after 2022, or are staff hearing those concerns for the very first time tonight?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think we hear concerns of this nature as it relates to Montreal Street and any number of other higher speed roadway in the city as it relates to barriers to access and barriers to crossing. And so those pieces are, and I think that intent is to address is reflected in the AT master plan. So it includes the sidewalk gaps that exist in the city, across the city, but it also identifies a priority as it relates to reducing barriers, particularly as it relates to pedestrian crossings and the ability for people and cyclists to cross these areas. Specific to Montreal Street in these locations, the city has the city does not have anything identified at Montreal and Sutherland, but we are upgrading the intersection of Montreal and Macaulay. It's one of the 4 locations that were identified for an intersection pedestrian signal that is to be constructed in 2021. And there are a number of changes, as Councillor Oosterhoff noted, there are a number of changes in and around the Montreal and JCB intersection as it relates to the 3rd crossing project. I can't speak to the specific components of what is with that, but there certainly is connectivity that's created for pedestrians and cyclists as part of that.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, going back to the report tonight, you mentioned, Mr. Semple, that sometimes recommended traffic calming measures get rejected or even removed. And I just wondered, as you work on the new policy with this consultant, if there could be a section in the policy giving details about removing an existing traffic calming, such as speed humps. So if somebody wants to remove a speed hump on a certain road, what the criteria would be to go about getting it removed. Can that be covered in the new policy coming forward in 8 months?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we can certainly consider how that process would work. I think one of the intent of the minor adjustment measures that we're talking about is, as Ms. Kidd discussed as well, that ability to intervene in a way that is that's minor and more expeditious, that allows those things to be tested to a certain degree. So the investment that is made in testing those features can be lower. And so if they are not effective, or if the desire is not there, it is easier to adjust or remove.
Okay, thank you. And then, Mr. Chair, I'll just have one more question when we're done. I can save it for the discussion part, but just to let you know, but it's a big one, but it's just one more question after all this.
Yeah, thanks. I would say if it's a big one and it's a good one, maybe during the discussion would be a good time for it, because on that. Yeah, and we don't want to be in a situation where we've said everything and we've asked all our questions when we're in the debating section either. Hopefully, these questions are meant to be more about information clarification, and they always tend to spill into shaping where we're going with the recommendation, and there's no way to avoid that. At this point, we're on our third round of questions, so keep it to questions to staff about what is the content of the report, and then when we get to deliberations, we can have a bit more leeway. Did I see another hand? I guess it was Councillor Doherty. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks, and through you. Mike, okay, so I just want confirmation. Whenever we do road repairs, we actually think about those streets, right? We reevaluate them in line of, is that maybe a street that where people do have any requests for some speed calming measures?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I guess the answer to that is it depends. So in most cases where repairs are being done, it's generally reconstructing what was there. It depends on the timing and whether there's other features that can be included. But I think the simplest answer is that in most cases when a repair is being affected, it's generally restoring it to the existing condition. It's not necessarily considering ways that it can be changed.
So could we build in a mechanism that would kind of, whenever a road is repaired, that there's some cross-reference to make sure that we're not missing some opportunities there?
I noticed that Commissioner Kidd has got her hand raised, so I'll maybe let her speak.
Sure.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. We actually have been trying to do that, but what we're finding is that, as Mr. Semple has indicated, it depends on the nature of the repair and the amount of time that it takes to try to identify the list of roads for repair, and in consultation with underground work that might be planned, in consultation with active transportation plans, and then to try to add sort of the traffic concerns to it. It is very, very difficult to accomplish. So we do try to consider it where it's known, but if we are doing like a maintenance repair, such as like we call it a shave and pave, for example, like what we just did with Gardner's Road, that is clearly it's an in and it's an out. So in a very simple way, I know it seems big, but in fact, Gardner's Road was almost like painting your house. You do some scraping and you put a couple of fresh coats of paint on it. That's very different than when we're doing road reconstruction, where we're actually changing curbing and things like that. So when we do road reconstruction, we definitely take into consideration enhancements that we could make with regard to active transportation and traffic concerns. But where we're doing straight maintenance, we just simply don't have the time to, and with a very short construction season to get the projects identified and out the door, it's just not possible. Plus it completely changes the project because then you're into redesign as well, so.
Yeah, any more questions, Councillor Doherty?
Yep, and my other question was really just a quick one about, do we have kind of some research on what is effective? Because Councillor Osanik brought up the speed display, but I noticed on Sir John A. Macdonald, it doesn't make a difference at all. So I wonder how effective, like all of these measures that I mentioned, they probably have different levels of effectiveness, and maybe that has something to do with location, but I wonder if you could speak to that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that is part of the work that is underway. So we are looking at best practices, I think, in other municipalities, including municipalities in Ontario, and the ways in which the various tools are used. And I think, as I kind of alluded to in the presentation, I think more importantly, the way I think that the tools can be used together to maybe best address some of the issues that arise based on their concerns.
Okay, great. Last chance for questions to the briefing before we move to recommendation. Okay, so that was briefings on the agenda. Well, that was item 6. So item 7, business A, update on traffic calming policy review and 2021 plans. The report is here, but before we remember, we will have, once the report is introduced, we normally have a round of questions, and then we go to members of the public for questions and comments. But I guess members of the committee go first. But does staff need time to introduce the report further to the briefing, the 15-minute briefing we received earlier? I guess not. So what we have is members of the committee may ask questions about the report and recommendation at this point.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make sure that Mr. Semple didn't have anything to add. He was on mute there for a second, but I'll see if he has anything to add or if we can proceed.
Yeah, so Mr. Semple.
Through Mr. Chair, I have nothing further to add.
So members of the committee may ask questions about the report and recommendations, hopefully in the aim of getting to the actionable options. And just to give you an idea of what they are, we will be voting yay or nay to the recommendation with 4 clauses and an introductory clause. That goes as a recommendation to council, and it can be approved verbatim, it can be rejected verbatim, in which case it goes to council in the negative form, fully intact, just as you see it here, but with a negative recommendation from the committee, or it can be deferred or amended as per the procedural rules. Those are the options when we come to the actionable part. So your questions should be related to that in mind. And I think I saw Councillor Neal. Councillor Neal.
Thank you. A couple of questions. I know that there has been expressed concern about over signage, and I appreciate that. But in a lot of streets such as Regent and Macdonell, we have families that are putting up their own school zone or caution children playing signs. And I'm wondering if the part of the recommendation can be that the city has such signs available without having 4 different designs and right along the street. So I'm not sure if that's part of the potential that Mr. Semple is considering.
So maybe before you answer, just confirm with the clerk, is the procedure the same? Do we go question by question, or do we all ask questions and staff respond to all the questions from councillors? I can't remember. It's a question to the clerk.
Mr. Chair, it should be question by question for the members, and then when we go to public, it will all be in one batch.
Okay, great, thanks. So the question from Councillor Neal to staff about the signs.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, those, I think signage that could be made available to residents or stakeholders or community groups. That is one of the pieces that we are looking at. I think your points about having a standard sign or a standard approach are certainly well taken and would be part of what would be considered with that.
Thank you. And my final question, because you mentioned it in passing earlier, is that the enforcement question, and I know this is going to spark lots of debate at council, but there is potential for speed enforcement electronically. Will that be a separate recommendation coming to council for debate, or will that be part of the options that are presented next year?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that I think automated speed enforcement would come separately from the recommendations that are included here in the traffic calming report. They certainly are linked in the way that one tool could support the other. As it stands right now, staff are bringing an information report back about the implementation of automated speed enforcement in Ontario that is slated for, I believe, for Q2 or Q3 of 2021. That would provide an overview of those pieces, and next steps would be developed there if that is the direction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a question to staff, specific question to staff that we didn't cover. I thought it might get covered, but it didn't. So at some point recently, we were, once bollards had been introduced to the city, there was talk of some center bollards. I believe it might have been even the last time this came to committee. There's some center bollards on Johnson and Brock. What happened to that suggestion?
Through you, yes. So as part of the buffered cycling lane, the bollards that were added to sections of Johnson and Brock, there was an original intention to include center lane bollards, the center slow bollards, as part of in sections of that, or as part of that implementation. There were some technical and safety issues that were identified when the design was moved forward. As it relates to 2 lanes of one-way travel and the way that the bollards were designed to be, designed for the cars to interact with the bollards. So that component of it, as I understood it, did not allow us to put those components in place. We were only able to put the flexible bollards in place for the cycling lane.
Okay, so are you saying then what we saw as a successful implementation, which was there this summer as well on King Street, as a center bollard that says slow near Bank Street, that was successfully implemented on a 2-way street, that is King Street, that was envisaged for Brock and Johnson, but because they're 2-lane, 1-way streets, it was not possible to do. Is that what you're saying?
Through you, yes. That is the gist of what the issue was. I can certainly get some more information on the technical pieces that I can share. I don't have that with me tonight, but I can certainly inquire as to what the details were.
Okay. So my second question is another specific one. In the report, it talks about the school zone at Johnson and Barrie. And that was one that I had brought to your attention in 2018. It's on the lists of different streets brought by councillors. It's also in the report as a school zone where some consideration would be given for 2021. So this is report 10 of page 10 of the report, related school zone work, Unity Road in front of Elginburg Public School and Johnson Street at Berry Street. And I'll ask my question about both those locations. I know Councillor Osterhoff would be interested in the response about the Unity Road location where his school is in Elginburg. And for us, it's in Sydenham and in Kingston, I guess, would be the Cathedral School beside St. Mary's Cathedral, Johnson and Berry. So I had a conversation earlier with a member of your staff, and it was very helpful. Essentially, what I was told is that these will be examined for possible minor alterations in 2021. Could you tell us what kind of options you'll be looking at, acknowledging that the work isn't complete yet, so you can't tell us exactly what work will happen, but what will you be looking at for those two school zones in the report?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so I think the inclusion of these two school zone pieces is intended to reflect that issue that exists where we have a traffic calming process, but then we have issues that are developing that aren't necessarily addressed by the traffic calming process, but are certainly important and need to be addressed especially as it relates to some of the priorities that have been set. So that the two school zone areas that are identified here were part of a report that was brought last year that spoke to sort of the updates that we would complete in relation to some of the school zones and school crossings. And these particular roadways are classified as arterial roadways, which I know we've kind of talked about. But the intent is to look at some minor adjustment measures or changes that could be considered around, especially around where the students are crossing or are prone to cross, to better address or enhance the safety that could be in place both for the students and in the case of the location at Johnson and Berry, the crossing guards that we have in place. So we've not done the detailed design work to sort of inform what type of measures would be considered, but the intent is to at least initially pull from those minor measures that I outlined in the report, and then to look at what some longer term changes could be from there.
Right. Are we talking about then in the toolkit, specifically in the actual, so the 2013 traffic calming policy has a lot of things in it: vertical deflection, horizontal deflection, supplemental measures, etc. Are we talking about those types of measures? Like what are, obviously there's a menu of options, but and you can't commit to any of them prior to the analysis. But just so that Councillor Osterhoff and I can at least understand how this clause or this section in the report applies to those two school zones, could you give us a little bit more specific details about what options are being considered?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So I think that the options that would be considered in 2021 pull from the minor adjustment measures that I presented tonight. So those are things like flexible bollards, speed display signs, on-road pavement messaging or other pavement markings, and other types of signage. And so those kind of minor adjustment measures that would be put in place initially that could then inform longer term changes if needed to address the issues that are there. Some of those longer term pieces could include changes like changes to the curbing, bulb outs, vertical delineation, horizontal delineations and narrowings, those types of pieces. That work is not anticipated in 2021, but we would look to put these initial measures in place and then look at next steps from there.
Okay, so like flexible bollards, paint on the roadway that say school zone, that type of thing. Okay, well, that's it for my questions. Any other members of the committee have questions? Councillor Olsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I do support these recommendations. Like Mr. Semple said, the last time we looked at our existing traffic calming policy, it was 2013. So this is 7 years later. And we see that, let alone the 2 streets we submit every single year, but staff get 200 requests, which is really hard to keep up with. And updating a traffic calming policy, I think is going to be a big task for the consultant that we've hired, and all the best to that consultant. And thanks to staff for trying to do as much as possible, addressing all of our concerns as counselors. I know how much back and forth I've gone with staff about one street, and I'm just one counselor. Multiply that by 12 counselors and maybe 2 streets each. It's definitely very time consuming, and that's why we have to try to see what we can do to make this policy better. So I just wanted to circle back with the last question that I had, and that was something that Councillor Doherty touched on, which was enforcement and how we get the police involved. You know, like putting speed humps in or doing bollards, that's just a small part of the solution. And we have to really curb the behavior of drivers going too fast. And sometimes you have to hit the pocketbook. And I know that we're going to be looking at the automated speed enforcement sometime in the future in another 2 years. But when staff said that they do communicate with the police, how exactly do we do that? How often? Is it once a month on a committee? And do the police actually, you know, how do we know that the police are really hearing our concerns as counselors about streets where we say that cars are going too fast on our side streets?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I think our interactions, like our information sharing back and forth with the police, I think it sort of occurs in 2 primary ways, I guess. One is, you know, specific to an incident or a collision, especially sort of the degree of the collision. We have contacts within the cities, within the police department's traffic enforcement group that we work with and share information back and forth. They may request information from us specific to a concern that's arisen, or vice versa. There's also, has not occurred recently, just with all of the pandemic sort of related items that are going on. But we do have a regular meeting that occurs with the police on with frequency of it, either quarterly or semi-annually, where we discuss the issues that have been brought up in general, and to also solicit feedback from the police about the concerns they are getting reported through their system, either from their officers or from residents that are reporting things through the non-emergency tool that the police have available. So I think to sum that up, it's shared as needed from an incident standpoint, back and forth, but we also have a regular meeting that normally occurs where we would share broad themes back and forth. And the police have participated as part of the city's road safety plan and as some of those, the development of some of the other plans as well to inform some of those enforcement components.
Okay, thank you. And just my last question as a follow-up to that is, how receptive are police to going out to our residential streets to like with their radar to try to catch speeders? From your standpoint, like, are they in these quarterly meetings we used to have, or now I guess we're not having them because of COVID and they have other priorities. So it seems from, in my viewpoint from a counselor, because I'm not seeing them out there with the radar the way I was before COVID. So I guess, are they making commitments that they're going to do something? Or, you know, do we all know they don't have the resources to spread out like that and go into our residential streets with radar?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, I think that certainly anytime we share information or requests with the police, they've certainly been very receptive to that. I know that when we're talking with residents in the community about speeding concerns, police have always asked that the residents also reach out through their non-emergency reporting tool and the online tool, because it allows them to create a specific file for follow-up with the resident who has that concern and to track those concerns. So I don't have specific information about the way that they're managing those components of it, but I can say that they have been receptive to concerns that we have raised and have encouraged the residents to contact them with those concerns.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So through you, Mr. Chair, I do support this recommendation, but I also want to move an amendment to add one.
Hang on, Councillor. Hang on, Councillor. Yeah. We have to go to members of the public who wish to speak to the recommendation before we get into that. And we'd have to move and second the recommendation before we do any amendments. So, but we really should go to members of the public first. So at this point, Madam Clerk, members of the public are invited to speak. I see on the attendees list, one member of the public has her hand up, has actually used the raised hand function. Oh, now two have. Excellent. I love to see a tech savvy population. So I recognize the first member of the public. You have 5 minutes. You can ask questions. You can make comments. All the members of the public will speak in order of just first come, first serve, 5 minutes each, and then staff will have an opportunity to respond to anything that they said at the end of all public submissions. These submissions are also recorded by the clerk, and of course, the audio will be on the YouTube channel if anyone wants to review the video later. So now I go to the first member of the public, which is Selena Chiarelli. You have the floor, 5 minutes.
Hi. Yes. So I'm glad I was able to attend this meeting, and I just wanted to mention that recently it's come to our attention that there's been a lot of issues with speeding on my particular street, which is Regent Street. I've had a family home there for a number of years. My mother lives there as well and has been there for a long time. And I know that it's a street that had issues before. I think it was 8 years ago that they probably put in a stop sign finally. It's a very long stretch of street with minimal stops, even despite the fact that there are a number of four-way sort of intersections that are there. So I've recently started a petition to request attention be placed on Regent Street. This petition was started in the summertime. However, recently we've had a specific accident. This is probably about 3 weeks ago. Or a month ago, that a car actually was speeding so fast that it hit a parked minivan and slid it 3 front yards down, so about half a block. And it was probably around 9 o'clock at night, or maybe 8 o'clock. It was just dark. And this is something that happened after many members of the public and on our street that we've discussed our anxiety surrounding the Regent Street issue. That speed has been, it's just quite terrifying when you have small children, a dog. There's a lot of seniors, and there are also a lot of young families that have started to move there. So with Regent Street as a consideration, there are a number of things. First of all, obviously, the citizens that are there, that we live there, but it's also about 3 blocks from Rideau Public School. So I'm curious about if you're pointing attention to impediments to pedestrians and cyclists, and also anything that might hinder, let's say, any kind of commute or any kind of walking to school. How close does that school have to be to have some real consideration? Because Rideau Public is probably 3 blocks away. So that's basically what's happening, and we're still just gathering a few more, we're still trying to gather more signatures for our petition at the moment, but that will be probably completed in the next couple of weeks or week or so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chiarelli. And at the end of all public submissions, I will get to respond. Now we go to the next member of the public who has a hand up. To the other members of the public who may be wishing to speak, if you're able to find the little raise hand button, the way you do that is you click on participants at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then there's a raise hand button at the bottom right under participants. Anyways, I see there's another member who's found that and has his hand up virtually, and that is Roger Healy. You have the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Hello, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. As you may already know, KCAT has been involved in the Quiet Streets project, which has been referenced a couple of times this evening, and it continues on until the middle of November. And certainly we have a lot of feedback that is relevant to this discussion that we would like to present at another opportunity later on when we wrap that up. But a couple of things that stand out to me, reflective of what the previous caller just talked about, was things like street racing and things that go on at 2 in the morning that many of you probably don't even know about or may not have experienced, but it's getting to be a little bit crazy and dangerous. As you recall, about a year ago, someone was seriously, a house was driven into on Brock Street, in the middle of the night. So I've just heard a lot of comments about mufflers that have been basically removed or disabled somehow, and people screaming around in the middle of the night using Brock and Johnson as speedways, and as well as Neighbourhood in the Williamsville area and Sydenham. So I'm just pointing that out to you that, you're talking about enforcement. There seems to be a real gap there. And this has happened just really in the last few months. So I'm just passing that along. I've heard a million comments about that. But I did want to say too that the whole traffic calming issue, it has to now rate up there as one of the oxymorons connected with it's right up there with jumbo shrimp and military intelligence. There's no such thing as traffic calming, and it just seems that everything that gets done, the original issue has been mentioned already, in that street design. We're stuck with the designs from the 60s and 70s where cars were expected to speed around and zoom around, and we don't really want that anymore. And the other thing that was mentioned tonight was that neighborhoods actually evolve and change over time, and so you can't make a design that is inflexible for multiple years. And the other thing I've been concerned with in the last little while is the fact that major road work is dictated to us by utilities. Kingston, depending on when a sewer has to be replaced or power service or something like that. And there doesn't seem to be any concern for traffic issues and transportation issues. And I think that it might be time to take hold of that whole process and get a little bit more coordination between what UK decides is an important development to tear up a road may not jive with what we think is needed as a transportation change. And these things have to be better coordinated, I think. So I'm just sort of, I'll leave you with that comment, but I think this is a very important issue to bring up. And obviously there've been a lot of questions and a lot of good discussion about it. And so I hope things continue. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Healy, for your submission today and for your hard work on the Quiet Streets project. That is definitely been noticed in my district this summer, and I have yet to receive any complaints as a district councillor. I'm happy to report about that project. There have been some comments, and I wish you luck with that endeavor as the pilot nears its completion for 2020. And thank you for that.
Thanks a lot.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? I see two other members of the public present, but if you can't figure out how to raise your hand virtually, you can also unmute and state that you wish to speak.
Mr. Chair, maybe I'll quickly just explain again how to raise your hand for the remaining two members. In the lower menu of the Zoom platform, there is a button that says participants. Once you click on that icon, that will load a list of speakers on the right-hand portion of your screen. At the bottom of that portion, there is a button that says raise hand. So if you do wish to participate, I'd encourage you to hit the raise hand button now. And Mr. Chair,
Okay, we're waiting a few seconds for the other two members of the public who are in attendance if they should wish to speak. And like I said, in case you can't find it, you can also unmute in the same screen, though, in the screen where it says participants. You have the option to unmute, but I do not hear anyone. All right, we'll presume that these are folks that are observing the meeting and do not wish to speak, and we will go to the recommendation. Need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. It has an introductory clause and 4 clauses. I will read it now, and then I'll look for a mover and a seconder.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, it looks like Councillor Neal has a point of order. He would like
sorry.
to
Yes, Councillor Neal, what's your point of order?
I believe there's an opportunity for staff to respond to the comments that were made by.
Oh, absolutely. Well said, planning chair. I forgot to give that time. Before we get to the recommendation, staff has the opportunity to respond to the 2 members of the public who spoke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll to Commissioner Kidd to speak to some of the issues and fill in any pieces that were required.
Commissioner.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I will speak to Mr. Healy's comments about the coordination of Utilities Kingston and the roadwork projects. And while I have your attention, Mr. Healy, I will say thank you very much for all of the work that you put into the Quiet Streets initiative. It was greatly appreciated by all. As I've mentioned before, there is a significant number of factors that need to be coordinated when trying to determine which projects will go forward in any given construction season. And although it may appear that Utilities Kingston is determining where construction and road work is happening, it's not actually the case that way. So the work that Utilities does, the underground work, is primarily focused on either pure asset management, where the assets simply have aged to a point where they need to be replaced to have any sense of reliability, or where we have combined sewers that need to be separated, and has been a long-standing proven program, primarily with an environmental benefit. And the last primary reason is for capacity to support existing land uses and development. So it's a bit of a balancing act trying to trying to identify what needs to happen. And it's particularly complex because a road surface, depending on whether it's rehabilitation or a brand new surface, has a fairly extensive life, hopefully. And so, you know, we're constantly working on that. So I just wanted to say that it's not that they're driving the work that's done. It just takes a lot of time to be able to identify where we can line up. And I think over the last 5 years, there was so much of a backlog that it was a little easier to identify projects. And certainly Princess Street, for example, was a prime project. It gets harder as we move into some of the local road areas. And so that's the work that we're doing, and we will continue to do that and plan together for capital projects. So I really did need to speak to that specifically. Thank you.
And through you, Mr. Chair, I think just as it relates to the comments that were brought up with respect to Regent Street, it may be, it's a good opportunity to clarify the process that staff take when we receive a petition, either through a petition that's presented at council or one that comes to staff directly. So petitions are treated as part of that transportation process that I outlined previously in my briefing. It's assigned a file number for review. Staff conduct site visits and gather some information, provide some feedback about what, if any, the next steps could be. But it's depending on the nature of the request or the issue that we're looking at, those requests then may be passed through to the traffic calming process, or would be addressed in any of those other ways that we spoke to as part of capital projects or with some other minor interventions.
Okay, great. So that is the questions and comments from the public and response from staff. So now we go to the recommendation, which reads as follows: that the EITP committee recommend to council that staff proceeds with the implementation of traffic calming measures on the local roads and within the school zone areas identified in this report as part of the 2021 capital construction work, that a new traffic calming policy be presented by Q2 2021 that prioritizes work within neighborhood transportation plan areas and school zones and includes tools for residents and other stakeholders to address street and block level concerns. That as part of this work, staff conduct a review of the previously assessed roadways to identify road segments that are located within school zones or the prioritized neighborhood association transportation plan areas, and recommend roadways that can be removed or shifted to other projects, and that the city suspend new traffic calming assessments under the current traffic calming policy for 2021, pending the completion of the policy review process. That's the recommendation of the 5 clauses. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Holland. Does anyone wish to speak to the recommendation? I'm sure someone would. Who wants to go first? Okay, Councillor Osand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, I support this recommendation for all the reasons I thought when I thought we actually had the floor and we're debating it. So I do want to add one clause to the recommendation, and that is just when the new policy comes back that we have as counselors like one more time to review it and one more public meeting before it's actually, you know, officially at the committee for us to hear it, debate it, and then vote on it. So I sent in the recommendation by email. I don't know if I should read it or if it can be displayed.
On screen now.
Yes. Gotta put on the
Maybe,
spec.
is it any way we can get it larger? It's very small.
And if not,
Yeah, there we go. That's
Right.
better. Okay, so there's a
Yes.
Councillor Sanik. Is there a seconder? Second by Councillor Osterhoff. I'll read it now. Add new clause 5 to the recommendation as follows. That prior to the presentation of to EITP of the new policy in 2021, staff seek further and timely consultation with district councillors, including feedback and information on how the new policy would affect their districts, and that staff hold one or more public meetings in order to further explain the proposed policy changes to the public prior to seeking approval of the policy. It's seconded by Councillor Osterhoff. Would anyone wish to speak to the amendment only? Councillor Holland.
Just a question. Sorry, is the intention that with the public meeting that it's like a public meeting for this whole issue, not district level public meetings? Is that correct? Right. Okay. Yeah.
Councillor Sanik.
yeah, it would be a public meeting like we're having tonight. So it'd just be one other public meeting with all of us, all the other counselors can come to, but definitely not like 12 district meetings, no.
Thanks.
Do you have anything else to say, Councillor Holland, to the amendment? Does anyone else wish to speak to the amendment? Okay, Madam Vice Chair, I wish to speak to the amendment. So if you don't mind taking the chair.
I recognize you.
Thank you. Yes, so thank you, Councillor Osanek, for this amendment. I think it is very much desired. I know that partly because there's a quiet streets pilot, partly in my district, and it's generating comment, and partly because of the increased need for active transportation that I've noticed from my residents during the pandemic. It's sort of a hot issue, and I don't know, unfortunately, although we love this EITP meeting, how obvious it is to the folks in my district anyway that these changes are going on. So I think that public meeting piece is an excellent one, and hopefully it can be well publicized, and I can do my part to spread the word in my district anyway. And to the part of the clause that says further consultation with councillors, I've got it here. Staff seek further and timely consultation with district councillors. So I reached out to staff today and spoke at length with a staff member about this, and it was very helpful. It was an interaction that it took the better part of an hour, and I don't think that the committee can accommodate that kind of in-depth discussion one-on-one with each councillor. So we need the opportunity to reach out to staff or to have staff reach out to us one-on-one or as in small groups, as we've done on other things, to really discuss this and be able to give the feedback about how it affects our neighborhood. Things like what Councillor Neal said about the speed humps, on how people tend to say they suggest them for a speeding problem, but as long as it's not on their block because it affects their car and so on. That kind of feedback needs to happen now that we've got a little bit of a glimpse of what we're talking about. So I fully support this amendment for those reasons and for a few others. And I encourage the committee to consider approving the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, and I return the chair to you.
Thank you. On the amendment by Councillor Sanek, does anyone else wish to speak? Okay, well then I'll call the vote on the amendment. All those in favor? All those opposed? And the amendment passes unanimously. So we now have an amended recommendation with 6 clauses. And I guess there's an amended, is there a way of getting the amended recommendation up on the screen, Mr. Clerk? or Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, we can pop that up in a moment or two. Do the technical issue. Elizabeth will just need a moment or two to add that to the bottom of the one, but maybe we can proceed with comments.
Yeah, so we'll go to comments from members of the committee on the amended motion, and then when it's ready, we can put it up on the screen. I think we understand what it looks like. Who would like to speak to the recommendation as a whole? All right, well, we've all interacted with staff. As the chair of the committee, I would just like to say that this is very important work, and the committee, obviously through tonight's meeting, we're now almost at the 3-hour point. Clearly, the level of interest is very high. Remind members of the committee to, I believe it was Councillor Sanik that said it was traffic calming is our #1 issue that we've received as feedback from residents, and I agree with that statement. Now that we've added the amendment with the extra consultation with both us and time to hold a public meeting to be able to have dialogue with members of the public, I believe, I speak for myself anyway, that I'd like to see us move forward with this as long as councillors are still part of the process. We've heard tonight how that happens, and the amendment adds more depth to that. But the last clause of the recommendation does suspend the current traffic calming process where we report streets to staff for review. So that will no longer be possible if we vote on this. I just wanted to make sure that the committee is aware of that. It moves the shift for our feedback away from that method to other methods as already discussed. That's all I have to say as chair. And
Mr. Chair, I am ready with the recommendation if you are to put it up on the screen.
Sure, put it up on the screen where we'll be voting on it momentarily unless anyone would like to comment. So there's the amended recommendation. You see the additional clause, so that's actually the final clause. The 4 original clauses and the introductory clause. If passed, this goes to council for approval as a recommendation from the committee, and it's council direction for staff to continue their work. Last chance to speak to the amended recommendation, Councillor Neal.
Thank you. Just very quickly, and this may be a question to the clerks. If there is a situation that comes up that seems critical, could a councillor bring forward a request for consideration and it wouldn't be considered needing reconsideration? I just wanted, because I would love to vote for this, but I don't want it to preclude our opportunity to address a situation that may be an emergency situation. Perhaps the clerks could address that, or Mr. Semple.
So to the procedural question of reconsideration, to Mr. Semple, would it be contrary to the direction of council should this all pass if Councillor Neal or another councillor brought an emergency situation to your attention at odds with the final clause of this recommendation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that I think that there is still an expectation that transportation issues in general would be brought forward. If you recall from my briefing, those 2 sort of parallel processes that we're running, what we're talking about is suspending the traffic calming assessments through the existing process. However, we still respond to almost 200 concerns that come in general. we review all of those concerns to ensure that there isn't a developing or specific safety need that must be addressed in a more immediate way versus something that would be a longer term change. So I think from the perspective of staff in the way that this motion is worded is that we would suspend the assessments that are completed as part of the official traffic calming program, where they would be added to the list that's included as part of Exhibit B. It doesn't suspend the review of transportation issues that come in from residents or from other stakeholders through the normal process. And certainly any requests that are made by councillors would certainly be reviewed as well. It's just we would not necessarily pass it through to the traffic calming program.
I appreciate that. That's reassuring. I didn't want any unintended consequences. So I appreciate that answer. Thank you.
Okay, well, seeing no further hands, I'll call the question on the amended recommendation. Council, all those in favor? All opposed? And that also passes unanimously with the amendment. Thank you very much. So that's business. Madam Clerk, are there any motions or notices of motion?
No, there are not, Mr. Chair.
Does anyone have any other business to briefly discuss? Correspondence, there is an item of correspondence on the addendum that we passed. A letter from Mr. Hedberg. And our next meeting is December 10th, 2020. And I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Neal, Councillor Doherty, those in favor? This meeting is adjourned, 2 hours and 42 minutes. Very well. Goodbye.